My name is Saj. This is Raph D'Amico. We actually both went to grad school together over at the Institute of Design in Chicago. I used to be a design researcher and UX designer over at Yahoo. And then now I've moved over to a startup called Jut that does data analytics. I do product design for them. Also taught over at General Assembly, so I did a little UX teaching over there. And then I also teach over at the Academy of Arts over in San Francisco.
And I'm Raph. Right now I'm a designer at Jawbone. I work on the health platform, physical UX, digital UX app, and I've been designing since around 2001. Saj said, went to grad school with him. I've worked at tiny companies, bigger companies, startups in San Francisco. I'm really psyched to meet you guys and talk to you today.
So we both also have super varied backgrounds. So I studied economics and mechanical engineering, and then moved over to design from there. So
also studied economics, like every designer does.
This gentleman over here to my right also used to run a record label at some point too. So at any point later on when we get into office hours, if you want to ask us about moving into design, those kind of questions, I think we could have some pretty good answers for you as well.
Or mid-90s hip hop. If anyone's into mid-90s hip hop, we're your guys. Cool.
All right, so we have a presentation set up for you guys. How many of you guys are familiar with UX, user experience design? What that means. Okay, so we've got a few hands here in the back. Awesome. How about with design in general? Familiar with done any design, whether it's drawing pictures or making logos? A little bit as well? Okay, great. Well, so we've got a pretty straightforward program set up. Because this is design is very much about making things. It's very interactive. So there's going to be a lot of times we're going to be asking you to get together into small groups and work on small projects. We want to make this very interactive. So we ask and we beg of you to ask us questions the entire time. So a number one rule in design and the culture of design is there are no dumb questions. So this is your time to ask really stupid, silly stuff. And I promise you we won't make fun of you.
Cool. So let's get started. Clicker. Yes. Bad design. So who likes this clicker? So the question, this is kind of the question that we're all here for. What's happening after the first slide of this presentation? So I'll ask it right now, because it's coming up. What's the difference between good design and great design? Right, that's why we're here, magically.
Exactly.
What's the difference between good design and bad design? Hopefully we can give you some tools today to start answering this question. So let's just jump right into it. This hammer, is it a good design? Show of hands for it's a good design.
I heard over here that it works. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by it works?
Well, it's designed to knock a nail, and it knocks a nail pretty damn well. And it's designed to pull out the nail, so hence it pulls out a nail. But it also hurts your wrist as it goes through it.
So it pulls out nails, it's able to nail things into walls. It hurts your wrist in the process as well, too. You talk a little bit more about it hurting your wrist.
Yeah. So the reason why is because I guess it's not ergonomically designed, and certain times when you hit it, it has a certain vibration that will kind of feel on your wrist. And well, it gets the job done. So hence for me, that is a good design. It's not great because it's still giving you some damages in between. You might miss, you might hurt yourself, you might not understand how to use it. That's a good one.
For some of you guys who didn't raise your hands, not a good design? Who hates hammers here? Okay, so it's a pretty straightforward one. What about this? Windows Phone. Actually, first of all, who knows what this is? Anyone not know what this is? Windows Phone. Is this a good design?
I hear a resounding yup over here. Is that right? A very certain yes. Can we hear more about why it's a good design?
I kind of like the way that it flows, how it flows, all that kind of stuff. This is how I look at it, and the lifestyle, it flays, I think.
And what is it that you like about the way that it flows, the way that it flips?
It's not, I think it's not too complicated. It's very design-based compared to Android or iOS. Or maybe because actually we are used to it. Android, iOS, that's something like new or special. Let's start to have one of the phones. That's quite interesting. I kind of like it, honestly.
Kind of like it. Okay, so we're hitting on a few really great things about design. So it's not very complex. Similar to a hammer, it gets the job done in some way. There's a little bit of disagreement, though. Some resounding not so yeses.
Some resounding meh. Say more. So prioritization, the simplicity. What do I do now? Where do I go?
So it's tough to prioritize, I heard. A little bit asymmetric. It's hard to tell what to kind of pay attention to. In some ways, almost quite contrarian with what was liked about the design, which is that it kind of flows and you can move from thing to thing. It's a very personal thing.
Anyone here who really, really hates it?
I think not many of us have played with it to know whether it's good or bad. So, that's example.
Haven't had a chance to play around with it, so how do you know if it's a good design or not? That makes a lot of sense. That's a great point. So there's how it looks in a commercial versus how it actually works when you actually use it. Two very, very different things.
Absolutely. So this is definitely something that you guys have all used. Paperclip. Paperclip a good design? Why do you think it's a great design?
Because I can use it to open up the SIM card.
It's brilliant. And
We don't use a lot of papers nowadays. We use computers a lot to do documents, but it is still relevant when I need to take out the SIM card.
It's fascinating, right? The paperclip was invented, what, a century before the SIM card? Has found a way to survive. So it's about how you use it. The object almost doesn't matter. It's about whether it accomplishes its functions. Anyone else? What's great about a paperclip?
Minimum material needed. The material needed is very less.
So it doesn't require a lot of material. It's very light. It's easy to produce. You could even add to that, it's really cheap. There's billions of these in existence. Just a piece of wire that's been bent. Now you can get your SIM card out with it.
here's a question. Is or was the paperclip designed? Is it a designed product? Yeah? So what makes it a designed product? I'm sorry, one more time? Okay, so from a manufacturing point of view, maybe it's easier to manufacture this shape than a triangle shape. Helps make it incredibly cheap and very prevalent. I'm sure in this room there's probably 15 paper clips that we don't even know exist here, sitting next to the floorboards. Great.
What about this guy? Who's used a mouse in the last week? Who hasn't used a mouse in the last week? So is the mouse a good design?
I guess at the point where movement and what it needs and the time it's spent to work on stuff. I guess it's a good design because it helps solve certain problems.
Actually, so you mentioned different uses of it. Let's throw out some different uses of a mouse. There's a mouse used in gaming. What else can you use a mouse for? What's that? You're one of the trackpad users. I can see this.
So maybe for precision, when you're doing very precise design work, are there times when an alternative to a mouse is better than a mouse? I'm sorry, sim tips? Oh, Cintiqs. I got it. So sketching pads, maybe? Maybe you're on the bus and you're on your way here and you're trying to finish up some work and there's no place to put your mouse. So this is a great point. So when the advent of touch technology, maybe that's the better interaction. It's much easier. You put an iPad or an iPhone in front of a little kid and what happens? They instantly know how to use an iPhone. You put this in front of a little kid, what happens? They instantly throw it at somebody across the room. So that's really interesting. So how intuitive is this thing? At the same time, this thing still has its purposes. When you're doing really precise design work, there's still a place for this thing.
What has more uses, a mouse or a paperclip?
Paperclip?
Yep.
So as you define your purposes better, the product design is better. If that makes sense.
And so we're getting this theme that the mouse was useful at a certain point in time. Before the mouse, there were other ways of interacting with computers. Before computers, there were other ways of interacting with information. Now we're used to methods that don't require a mouse. We touch our tablets directly. We use trackpads. We can use a Kinect to interact without touching the piece of technology at all, or a Leap Motion. We have technology all around us. We have technology that we wear, like the Jawbone UP, or the Fitbit that interacts with us without us having to do anything. So we're getting a sense that there's this thing separate from the object that needs to be done, and there's new objects that are coming along over time, and that might do the job better than the old object and obsolete it. What about this guy? Does everyone know what this is? Anyone not know what this is? So it's interesting, right? Very, very famous designed object. Is it a good design, the Segway?
I heard a yes over here. Let's hear more about it.
Wait, has anyone ridden the Segway? Raise your hands if you've ever ridden a Segway. Nice.
Okay, so 6 or 7 people or so. Any thoughts on why it is great design?
It's quite intuitive when you move, when you forth and back, and you can actually control what the I think it's a great design. It gets the job done, travels well. It just looks awkward if you're using it and there's no one else.
So we heard again that it's intuitive, something that you immediately understand as soon as you're on this thing. The counter side being that it's kind of looks awkward. Have you guys seen anybody riding around on these things? Interesting. I don't know if it's the most aerodynamic of ways to travel.
Anyone really, really want one? What's one thing that makes this not a good design? Just throw stuff out. Cost, battery, size. Feel free to yell. You can yell at us.
I'm sorry, I heard somebody over here. Maybe it's not accessible. Maybe for someone with bad balance. I know it's expensive. In the U.S., I think it's illegal to drive it on the sidewalk and slightly illegal to drive it on the road as well too. So there's not really a place to drive it.
What are things that make it a great design? For those of you in particular who've ridden it, what was awesome about it? It's fun. It's fun to ride. Feels a bit like skating. Intuitive. You just stand on it and you can interact with it.
So once again, we're hitting on these themes again. There's a sense of some objects are intuitive, some others are less intuitive. Things like the hammer, things like the paperclip, things like a touchpad. Some things have very specific jobs, others much more general. So paperclips, very general jobs, all sorts of things it can do, including popping open SIM cards. Others are much more specific. Things like the mouse now has a much more specific place than it did before. Segway as well, something very specific. All these things that we've been talking about so far have these jobs that they're helping people achieve.
So what's the difference between good design and great design? We're gonna discuss that for the next hour and a half. What's been thrown out, a lot of the things that we've just talked about, a lot of the examples have been given, fall in a bunch of different camps. You've talked about things that are easy to use. You talked about things that are expensive, not expensive, things that work or don't work. We're gonna show you guys a few frameworks that might help to organize those ideas and give a concise way to maybe answer this question. But what's really interesting to me is that it's actually really not about good design or bad design. What we've noticed in our practice is that it's really about what makes a good design, or the person making it, or the team making it. And so where we're gonna start is not with what makes a good design or bad design, but with what makes a good designer. Because that will ultimately lead to a good design or a bad design. And you'll see how the process that a designer can follow leads to the types of outcomes that we've just gone through a little bit. So maybe you guys have already seen this video. If you have, I'm sure you'll be happy to see it again, because it's totally awesome.
Just want to check, do we have audio on this?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. literally, my eyes tear a little bit every time I watch that video. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Have any of you guys seen that video before? A few people. Any thoughts? Anything you noticed that was surprising? The courage to say no. You say a little bit more about that? You can't design something that fits everybody, or else it fits nobody at all. Yeah, and the one thing that hits me about that is when you look at Apple's products, there's how many products are in their total product line? Including adapters, everything, maybe 100, 150?
Way less than that.
And they're brave enough to say that, for that one beautiful iPhone that they've only made 8 generations of so far, that there's been hundreds, if not thousands of times where they've made something or tried something out and it didn't work out. And it wasn't about that beautiful object, which is incredibly beautiful and created by absolutely talented people, but there's that piece of it that's that process of going through and trying those things out hundreds of times, thousands of times until they get to that point.
I guess it's not just the no as well. The fact that you said the iPhone itself went through 8 generations, the iteration that it goes through from the day one. Because if you look at it, the shape and how it works is still the same from the initial iPhone. It's just now they're iterating. It's getting better and better and better. It's not like they totally revamp it and call it Apple phone. It's still the same iPhone that's been visioned from the first up until now. So I guess that iteration part is also kind of key on comes after no. So probably like one of the things that if you design something, it doesn't work out, it's a no. But what's next after the no? You just have to continue and build it and somehow solve the solution, solve the problem.
Yeah. The key phrase in that video is 1,000 no's for every yes. It's not one no, it's not 10 no's, it's not 100 no's, it's 1,000 no's. And 1,000 no's actually requires a lot of creativity to create 1,000 things that you can say no to. A lot of the things that we talked about as reasons that the products at the beginning of this presentation were good or bad, many of those should have been no's, perhaps. Or maybe there were yeses that they hadn't found yet, which is why they had to iterate some more.
I think you also hit on something else really interesting, which is what is happening in between these different iterations too. They're going over and they're trying the same thing over and over again, so it seems, but we're not able to see all the other things that they've tried out, all these other models that are sitting in their shop. And then the other great point I thought you made was, what do you come back to? You hit a no, but where do you go to next? Do you just go somewhere else randomly, some other different idea? So I think we're going to try and answer that over today and tomorrow as well.
Yeah. So Julie Zhu, who runs design at Facebook, put out this wonderful Medium post. How many of you guys have seen this? I see some smiles. It's very simple, but it's quite powerful. What's the difference between a junior designer and a senior designer? Which is slightly different from a good designer and a great designer. Well, a junior designer kind of starts maybe already in Photoshop, and just kind of does stuff and goes on this meandering path. And they might have some idea of what problem they're solving, but they're just kind of going, and they iterate. And they might have 1,000 no's, but they don't know why they're saying no to things. Or maybe they're not really saying no to anything. They're just kind of on this random walk. And how many of you guys are designers here or create? Awesome. So at some point, you are all junior designers, and you're probably very familiar with this. All of you guys who are here learning about this or about to embark on this journey, you will all do this. I've done this. Sajid has done this. You start following an idea. Now, the way a senior designer works is slightly different. They start with a strong hypothesis, and they immediately generate a huge number of options, branching off in a lot of different directions, using some structures. We'll show you guys some of those structures later to make sure that they're looking in the right ballpark. At the beginning, you're starting out very abstract, you're going very wide. And you're saying no to a heck of a lot of things. Some of those options turn out to not be so bad, so they follow them along. But they're going in straight lines. Those straight lines are going in a bunch of different directions, but they're not doing this. And they're saying no to things the whole way. So it looks like a little tree with a lot of dead branches, but only so that the other branches can grow more strongly. And eventually, some of the good ideas, as they get refined and go off in different directions, some of them diverge. Sometimes they diverge so much they become different products, kind of like with the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. Sometimes they start converging again, and they combine into a better, more simple concept. But the whole time they're saying no. So how do they do it? We've noticed that really, really great designers that we've worked with, our mentors, our colleagues, at some of the best companies, have these, I guess we'd have to call them superpowers. And some of them you wouldn't even realize that they're doing it until you've been around it for a while. The last three we're going to talk about tomorrow, but framing and seeing are the first two that we want to talk about. And framing is about making sure that your idea of the problem that you're solving is correct when you start. Seeing is about making sure that you're shining the spotlight in the right place. Riffing and making and iterating are all about the process that, as you mentioned, Apple did over 8 generations out in the world and over 1,000 generations at one infinite loop behind the scenes. And it's the skill of how do you see whether you're doing the right thing or not. So let's start with framing. So Tomer Sharon from Google. Too many times we perfectly solve the wrong problem. Who here has ever solved the wrong problem? I don't believe you. It's definitely more than 2 of you. Maybe the 2 of you are the people who perfectly solved it. Congratulations. Big hand.
So when we say perfectly solve the wrong problem, what that means is there's those times where we're working on things, and there's that turning point. You're working, you're doing some incredible work, and you realize all this incredible work is going to make something, but it's not going to help anybody or anything as it initially intended. A really fascinating thing where you have that turning point inside your head where you're about to release something out to the world, but you realize that it's just not going to have the impact that you want it to have.
So this is a model that we use a lot. It's a very, very simple model. The reason simple models are good is because you can actually remember them. The Bonds breakthrough model. A great thing for the world, we're not even going to call it a great design, a thing that the world deserves to have, a thing that deserves to exist. Given that there's billions and billions and billions of objects, and that billions of those objects are terrible. So you don't want to create something that's just going to end up in a landfill or a digital landfill. It's something that people want. Sure, this is UX class, right? This is what we're talking about. But there's also 2 other things, and they have to be in perfect balance. It has to be something that people want, that's desirable, something that's technologically feasible, and something that's business viable.
So what they've done is design consultancies have looked at breakthrough and innovation after one another, and they find that the ones that really stick, the ones that really make a massive impact, are able to sit right here in the middle. They're able to be things that are desirable for people. They meet people's needs. They solve problems. They're technologically feasible. So I would love to be transported instantaneously back to my house in Cary, North Carolina, so my mom can make me some biscuits. But that's not technologically feasible. And then lastly, there's a business model that sustains them. So when we talk about framing, the biggest thing we're trying to avoid is there's a cognitive bias that they call narrow framing. And that's when you look at a problem and you're looking at too small of it. So by making sure you look and see what is it that people want, what is it that's technologically feasible, and lastly, what is viable in terms of business models, you start to make sure you're getting a full understanding of what we call the problem space.
Let's talk about sleep.
So this is going to be a brief example to kind of illustrate this a little bit. So if we were to talk about this example in terms of sleep, we can go through and start looking at each one of these areas and really start to understand what we're calling the problem space around sleep. So the first thing we'd want to look at is, if you could step forward for me, Mr. Raff. So we might want to look and see what's technologically feasible in this area. So what is some technology that's people are using in the territory of sleep? So, for example, there's things like activity trackers. So we have things like the Jawbone UP. We have things like the Fitbit that people are using to track their sleep. We have things like motion sensors. We have iPhone alarm clocks that people are using every day. We have social networks, so these little systems that nudge people and let them know when they should go to sleep. Any other technologies you guys can think of in terms of sleeping maybe you use? White noise TV.
Nice.
You talk a little bit more about that?
Well, sometimes, back in the day, when there's actually white noise on TV, just leave it on and kind of soothes you. It gets into a trance and it just falls asleep.
So something to help you fall asleep, just to have white noise in the background. That's great. Any other pieces of technology that are relevant to sleeping? Your bed? You talk a little bit more about your bed? Well, not your bed in particular, but
And
if
any
you want
bets?
So you've got memory foam, so something that forms to your body as you're going to sleep. So already, if we're thinking about how can we help people sleep better, we have so many new options. So maybe before I was just thinking about alarm clocks, maybe instead I can start thinking about the mattress that people are sleeping on. We can think about how that connects to whatever alarm clock that they're using. Is that bed able to vibrate to wake them up? Who knows? That's when we're starting to make sure we're looking at the entire problem space. So from here, you might go forward, and you might want to look and see what business models are people using out there. So this is kind of an exercise to start understanding how are people solving people's problems and making it sustainable. So for example, there's sleep coaching apps, so apps that you can use to help you figure out when you should be going to sleep. There's professional diagnosis. I can go to a sleep counselor and try and understand why I have insomnia. There's also sleep aids. So I could just take a pill before I go to sleep. Maybe it helps me sleep better. And then lastly, there's all sorts of retail products. You have alarm clocks, you have phones, phone apps, all sorts of things that can help me sleep. Any other business models that you guys feel like I'm missing when we're talking about sleep? So now we start to understand, okay, these are some ways that people are making things sustainable. And then lastly, we can start to see what are the problems in the space that we want to start looking at. So this is usually the place you actually want to start. So one problem I have is I never have any idea how much sleep am I supposed to get. Should I be getting 9 hours of sleep? Or maybe I only need 7 hours of sleep just because that's how I'm built. It's a really tough problem to try and solve. I also have this issue where I stay up too late, where I know I need to go to sleep, but like there's an app I just got, or I hop on the computer and play video games with Raph until 2 o'clock in the morning. But for some reason, I still don't go to sleep. That's kind of a weird problem, but still a problem I'm sure lots of people have. And then lastly, another big one is sometimes I just don't know why I sleep badly. So has anybody gone to sleep and then woken up the next day and they had a terrible night's sleep and they just don't know? They did everything right, but they still slept really badly? A total problem that seems like at least a few people in this room are having as well. So we look at these three areas and we start to have a solid understanding of what's the problem space that we're kind of operating in. So this can be really relevant to the startups you guys might be working on. So you might have a specific idea, but this might be an opportunity to take a step back and make sure you're understanding everything that affects those people that are having the problems that you're trying to solve. So there's a couple rules of thumbs when you're using a model like this. The first thing is you want to start with what's desirable. Try and understand what people's problems are first, and then go and move on to see what's technologically feasible, and lastly, what the business models are that can keep it in place. That way you go and you start wide and you start to really start with a user-centered design process. Secondly, what we want to look at is, this is especially relevant for your own apps that you're working on, is you want to work on a problem space and not a product. So instead of talking about alarm clocks, we're talking about sleep. So if we were just talking about alarm clocks, we would totally not have this conversation about where do people sleep, what are the white noise machines that they're using at night. By including this space, as opposed to just the product, we can start to make sure we're getting full coverage.
And you guys might ask, but Saj and Raf, this is UX. Isn't this just about the user? What's all this technology and business stuff? And I think this is why models like these are so important. Because the most important thing about a good design is that it's an overall experience that's solving a problem. And that the user problem is only 1/3 of it. And it needs to be perfectly balanced between the three in order to exist. So we're going to discuss a few more examples, and we're going to switch to an exercise so that we can dive into this into a little bit more detail.
Any questions right now? Is this relevant? Is this completely useless? Anybody find this completely useless? I'll close my eyes and I'll ask the question again. Okay, so we're going to get into to actual activities in just a minute, but let's move through a couple examples. So let's kick off with this guy. So do you guys know what one of these are? Okay, so
Everyone's used this technology? Okay.
okay, so let's kind of just kick off a conversation. So when it comes to taxis here in Malaysia, what are some of the problems that they're solving? Transportation. You talk a little bit more about transportation?
Getting from A to B, A to C, and so forth. So for those who are not able to afford to own their own cars, they have a choice of using public transportation, one of those is taxi, and it's widely available, easy to reach, as wherever they are. The density of taxis is really high, so it kind of helps them out.
Okay, lots of taxis all around, really easy to get from A to B. Everybody knows how to use a taxi. Any problems that they're not solving very well? Getting from A to B. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I guess we have a problem of taxi haggling as well, and refusing rides. So that's kind of a pain. So that's not solving the problem that should be solved.
Okay, so maybe there's refusal of rides. It's not a very democratic system.
And here's a user problem that we noticed in the day that we've been here, coming from quite cool San Francisco. Why not just walk? It's pretty hot.
So they're nice and cool. They're solving the problem of just overheating on the way to wherever you're trying to go.
User problem of sweat.
Yeah, this is one of those user problems that might have effects on not only you, but the people you're with as well. So when we talk about the business models that are in place, what's the business model like for these guys? What's that? So charge per ride. So it's kind of like an agency model. So there's some sort of taxi dispatch. Each individual taxi driver is in charge of their own taxi.
Let's prime this as well. How many of you guys own a car? So one of the business models they're competing with is the business model of whoever's trying to sell you and get you to keep that car.
And then lastly, what technology is it using right now? Using automotive gas combustion engines. Are there any pieces of technology that they're not using very well that they could be? What's that? The meter.
The meter.
So, okay, this is a great one. So they've got this meter that's hand controlled that they may not be using. They may turn off voluntarily. Nobody's really paying attention to that. They've got this occupancy light that they've got to flick on and flick off, and they can choose when to. Maybe they flick it on so they don't have to pick certain people up. Really interesting. So we can start to see the technology they're using very well, combustion engines. Technology they're not using very well, electric cars, smarter uses of these meters. We start to really understand what they're doing really well in the problem space of transportation and what they're not doing very well.
User problem, technology problem, business problem. Let's look at another platform that exists that we just found out about. Seems really cool. Is anyone from MyTaxi in here today, by the way? You guys. So what's a great user problem that this is solving?
There's a problem with fare, taximeters. There's a lot of problems in the taxi industry in Asia actually. So, will you personally know?
So what are some of the user problems that this is solving really well?
Oh, one of the things is getting a taxi for a change. Without my taxi, you have to pay from the street, and you have to wait for long hours to get taxi. So with my taxi, it helps you to get a taxi, like in a minute, a couple of minutes, depends. Yeah, and then safety features also.
Safety. Say more.
Yeah, we have a share my ride kind of thing, where you can let your loved one track to where you are using the transportation. So before this, especially for single female, they're afraid to ride a taxi, especially at late night. So with this kind of feature, we help them.
So there's some safety issues that it's handling. You don't have to do any, you have to wait as much as you usually have to. So what's the business model like for, I'm sorry, how do you say it again? My taxi? My taxi?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're also known as Grab Taxi in other countries.
What's that?
Booking per ride.
I'm sorry. One-
Bookings per ride.
Oh, bookings per ride. So you pay per ride. Alternative business models might be, there might be a monthly plan that you could get for a taxi service. It could be a completely free service, possibly. Not very sustainable.
Yep.
And then let's talk about the technology that, that My Taxi is using.
We're just using an app.
We have two different apps, one with the passenger and one with the driver. So that is the technology that we use.
So there's a two-sided app. There's an app that the driver uses, an app that the user uses as well. And when we think about some of the problems that they're solving, is there anything that they're not solving very well from anybody else? So there's a game theory issue that's popped up here, where now because you can put a tip in before you take a ride, sometimes those taxis will only wait for people that put in an extra tip. Cool. So now we're starting to get an idea of another product in the transportation space, even more coverage of these three different areas of transportation. Okay, and this is going to be our last example here. So,
Second to last.
second to last example. So we have, are you guys familiar with this guy up here on the screen? Has anybody had a chance to ride in one? Nothing yet? Okay, yeah. You guys have any idea of the kind of user problems that this guy's solving for? I mean, there's already really fast cars out there. There's already electric cars out there. What's this guy doing?
It's already expensive cars out there.
I'm sorry? It's electric and fast.
And for the consumer, or if the driver wants to get for it, it's not just conversation.
An affordable supercar.
The patent is accessible to everyone.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Patent is accessible to everyone now.
The patent is accessible from everyone. You say more about that?
I think Elon Musk, what he did is for a few months ago, he opened the patent for, I think, even the facilities for electrical stations. Everything, he opened up all the patents so everyone can use it.
Patents are, so they have an open platform, something completely different than's happened with other cars. I know in the US, nothing is definitely open in Detroit, so.
With electric cars is that charging is not fast and not accessible compared to gas stations. So they solved it by putting up the super fast charging stations around the US and in malls and stuff like that as well. So they are solving on a charging level as well.
So this is a bit of an overlap of a user problem and a technology problem. So their charging's really slow, generally prohibitively so, but they've made really fast charging stations, figured out where the biggest user problem was, applied their resources there. Awesome.
Yeah, this is a gold standard example of technology, user problem, and business model coming all the way together. When you list all of those out, it's hard to see any of the parts of this, like the supercharger stations, that aren't a user problem. I'm trying to get my thing to actually go more than a mile. A technology problem of electricity and electric batteries in cars take a while to charge, so how do I deal with that? And a business model problem of how do I get people to actually build supercharger stations? Or how do I defeat the existing network of gas stations that is very well established and doesn't necessarily want this? Yeah, so user problem, right? I want to look sexy. Might be one of the original user problems. It's interesting, right? Like I work at a company that makes wearable technology, and one of the things that Jawbone is known for is wearable technology that looks a little bit nicer than its competitors. Sometimes it actually does less. But absolutely a user problem. This thing won't fit with my shoes, so I'm not going to wear it.
Because seriously, everyone thought that because this is a field. This doesn't look like a car.
Doesn't look like an electric car. Yeah, definitely.
So we'll move on to the final example. I think Elon Musk just announced this. I think it's the new thing. I don't know.
Have you guys ever had a chance to use one of these before?
It's pretty nice.
All right, so let's talk about the what kind of user problems is. Does everybody know what this is? Yeah, everybody seen a couple episodes of Star Trek. So let's talk about the user problems that this is solving for. Transportation. It's really sexy and it's probably really fast.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's kind of solving the whole thing that we're talking about from the beginning of it, where we were talking about people, balance breaking model, and then we went to treat this model. So this is like the final destination. This is it, you know. Once we have this, we can have a spaceship and travel somewhere and teleport you to the spot. You don't have to worry about mileage. You don't have to worry about gas. You don't have to worry about recharging. It's just whether you're gonna, you know, be as who you are or something else. It's a different story. So I guess it's that ultimate solution.
This is the ultimate solution, that final destination, hopefully. Yeah, the interesting thing about this one, one of the reasons we included it is that really big user problem. And if you think about things like user problems around transportation and only the user problem, you can come up with awesome stuff like this. And then you start thinking about the technology problems. We're just not able to do this right now. Business model problems. I haven't seen an episode of Star Trek yet that's really addressed the cost of a transportation machine. I'm not really sure how they're funding it.
I think it requires a Starship. Those are super expensive.
Yeah, there's a small investment, so
Oh, man.
slightly more expensive than a Segway.
Actually, an interesting point was I heard a story where they actually created the creator of that Gene Roddenberry, was it? He created transportation effect to solve the business problem of having the special effect of the plane always landing down in the air. So it costs much more than actually having the filming the scenes for the helicopter. So I guess that did solve the business problem as well. Not one that is related to transportation.
That's an awesome story.
The cinematography problem, yes.
In case not everyone heard that, is saying that Gene Roddenberry, one of the reasons that the transporter exists in this show is that it would have cost too much to get the footage of a spaceship landing on a planet and dropping everyone off, and this was cheaper. Business problem, technology problem, and I guess Gene Roddenberry's user problem.
So this is another example of why we need to make sure we're thinking about all threes. And as designers, I think this becomes a superpower because if you're able to think about business problems and technology problems in addition to the desired problems, you're able to talk at that table with those people that are making those business decisions, with those engineers that are building products. So it helps keep you from kind of getting pushed off into building beautiful teleportation devices that aren't really possible.
So I think we should go into an exercise. We'd love for you guys to have a chance to apply this to some things that are close to you. So we're going to spend a few minutes, and we're going to use the big sheets of paper. Everyone has a sheet of paper? Everyone has a pen? Awesome. And we'll do this in little groups. Is there a question?
Quick question. You mentioned briefly that there's a difference between good and good design.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate more on that?
Of course. So a lot of these frameworks are the difference, actually. And so, for example, let me link it back to the original question, right? Good and great design. When we first walked in here today, the first example I put up, the hammer, we said, is it a good or a great design? And one of the things that makes it a great design knocks a nail in. One of the things that makes it a bad design, it vibrates against your wrist, right? When you start unpacking it, if we were to ask that question again of what makes the hammer a good or great design using this framework, we would say, oh, what makes it a great design? It's easy to understand. User problem, I need to get a nail knocked into a piece of wood. I get it. Solves my user problem. Technology problem. Hammers are pretty easy to produce. There was a time when people were not able to make hammers, when you just use a big rock. But it's come together. We have shock-absorbing hammers for your problem with rubber handles. The technology has come a long way. And so we can break it down. What are the technologies that allow it to be good? Well, rubber handles, lightweight materials, resilient metals. There's a million different types of hammers for different tools. So for different purposes, different types of nails, different types of things you want to knock in. And there's a technology that supports each of them. And in terms of business model, you can buy a hammer for nothing now. There was a time when that would have been an expensive tool that you'd have to make yourself, or that would be a more prized possession a long time ago. That the tradesman who walks around with his tools hundreds of years ago, you'd be excited when that person came to your town because they could afford to have tools and they could help fix your stuff. Now you can go to a hardware store, you can buy a hammer for, the same as an expensive cup of coffee, which is crazy when you think about it. And so it took all of those things aligning to make it a great design. And if you take any one of those out, then suddenly it's not so great.
So hopefully over the next couple of days, we'll cover exactly what is that difference. And this is that first step, which is framing. So take the hammer example again. If you were hired to create the new hammer, one approach you could take is just to take a hammer, make it a little bit more aerodynamic, maybe make it sexier, maybe make it cheaper. Another approach you could start thinking about is, well, what's the problem that a hammer is solving for? Yeah. So a hammer is trying to connect two things together. Now, the scope of that might be different if you're working for a construction company or a kitchen company. But now we can start to back up and think about. Sure.
Please.
Because it seems like instead of creating a car, we're trying to create faster horses, right? If you're trying to create a small aerodynamic cameras, for instance. So my question about this framework, where you're trying to balance the two elements, is that, for instance, wearables today, like maybe Fitbit, health trackers, or even Apple Smartwatch, they all fit very neatly into these two frameworks, and yet they seem to be so underwhelming in some of the extraction. And so my question is why? Why would good products created by talented designers and very expensive technologies still have this solve all design needs?
So actually, that's a beautiful example. So the Apple Watch or wearables in general, they've only been around in their current form for, less than a decade. They're, in a lot of ways, a new technology. People have been experimenting with them for decades, kind of like before you bought your first iPhone in 2007, there were multi-touch displays in the late 80s that worked. So it's been a very, very long process of getting it to the point where it was miniaturized enough that you could use it. But the beautiful thing is they're not solving user problems. They're not solving technology problems yet. Well, there's nothing you can put on your wrist right now that will accurately measure your heart rate really, really well. The Apple Watch, will it work when you're running, when you're moving your wrist around a lot? Probably not without, and these are some of the problems that we've studied in other wearables, without you having to wear it so tightly that it will leave grooves in your wrist. And maybe they will solve it, and that'll be awesome, right? Because that'll be one technological notch up. But I can break it down with this model, and I can say, well, they haven't solved the user problem. Take heart rate. Nobody really knows how to use heart rate. How many of you guys work out and use a heart rate monitor? One person. This organ that powers our entire body is something that's still a mystery to all of us. So the user problem, not yet solved. The technology problem, we can't get an easy measurement with something really, really cheap. And the business model problem, well, I don't really know what to do with it yet. So just taking that one slice through it and imagining all the other slices, like navigation, for example. What are all the things that I have to do to be able to get something on your wrist that helps you to get to the place you want to get to faster? Well, I can break that down. I can say, well, user problem, where do I want to go? Okay, maybe that's a clear user problem that we can talk about. But secondly, the technology. Well, none of these things, except the really expensive ones, have a GPS device in them. So the technology isn't quite there yet. It needs to be miniaturized more. So I'm seeing why one of the pillars of this isn't going to support the overall design. And then the business model, actually, this kind of information, the GPS information, is pretty available pretty cheaply. So maybe that's something that isn't a problem right now. But if the technological piece can't work, then the whole thing's not going to work. So this model helps me to understand why some things aren't good designs, just by forcing me to separate those three elements out. And then asking myself, which of these pillars is failing? Actually, wait, there's one really cool story involving this. So when you're using, any of you guys use Pinterest? So Pinterest's entire business model is based on you scroll, and then you keep scrolling, 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 and then you scroll some more, and then you keep scrolling forever. Because it's addictive, and it's beautiful, and it continues to load things as you scroll. Same with Facebook, right? You scroll, you scroll, you scroll, you scroll, you scroll. New stuff comes in. Next thing you know, it's like 4 a.m. and you're going to have a shitty night's sleep. So infinite scroll. Powerful technology that supports a business model, because the more you scroll, the more ads they can show you, which is great. The more likely on Pinterest that you'll stumble on something that you want to buy. Affiliate marketing, which is great. And by the way, affiliate marketing is a business model and a technology, so that needs to exist. And user problem, well, I want something beautiful and I want to keep seeing beautiful things because I like being surrounded by beautiful things. But why does that exist? Infinite scroll did not exist before 2006-ish. And the designer of the Facebook newsfeed, she has this great story that when she was first coming up with the idea and trying it out, the thing about scrolling is that it was hard. What was missing? Mouse wheels and trackpads. You'd have to take your mouse, drag the pointer to the right side of the screen, pull down the page, drag it back, click on stuff, then drag it to the side of the screen. And so infinite scroll could not exist. It just couldn't, not a thing. But as soon as you had a mouse wheel or a trackpad, it's just this one gesture. And so, yeah, it's a user problem, but there's layers of technology that need to exist to make it happen. And those layers of technology are separate from the business models and separate from the user problems. And if you think about them all at once in one big glob, then it's easy to get lost. And so this helps me. One thing, caveat, there are many, many, many models. This is just one of the ones that is so helpful that it keeps coming up over and over and over again. Does that answer your question? Awesome, we should talk later. By the way, if any of you guys are skeptical, it makes for a way better lecture. So throw stuff out. It's really cool when we can have discussions like these.
Awesome. Let's go for it. Let's give this a try.
Yeah, let's do this. So let's see. You guys are on tables, roughly 3 people. That's great. So we're going to take a few minutes, and there are 2 parts. One, let's do the thing where they talk to each other. Let's do the thing where people have to talk to each other. Sorry. At your tables, you're going to take a concept and run it through this model, or take it through something out in the world. So I think a good way of doing this is just power out and take a couple of minutes to try and find something that you've all used. And then just on one sheet of paper, try and break down what are the user problems that it's solving, what are the technology problems that it's solving, what are the business model problems that it's solving. Do you want anything?
Yeah, that sounds great. One thing to know as you're going through, so find those people next to you and find that thing that you guys have all used, and take a minute to back up and think about the problem space that it's in as well too. So if you're looking at something like a food finding app like Yelp, you might be able to think about, it's restaurants or dining, and then you can kind of just think about the space as well.